But first I want to open up the vSphere client that's logged into the protected site. Again, we're here at the site recovery management screen, and to make sure we're at the protected site, just look at local site and you can see that yes, we're at the protected site. So where have we come from? Again, we're under the protected setup, and we've done connections, which is pairing the sites or establishing site reciprocity. We have array managers configured. We have inventory mappings configured. Now let's do some protection groups. To do that, just go ahead and click Create next to the Protection Groups section. You'll give this a name. Could give it a description. I'm just going to click Next since it's my only protection group. We'd also want to select the data store that we're going to be protecting. In this case, I only have one, so I select it, and as you can see, there's 4 virtual machines contained on that. Go ahead and click Next. Now we want to choose the data store in which to store the placeholder VMs. If you remember from the previous theory slide, we talked about placeholder VMs or shadow VMs. They're simply a configuration file that stores the inventory mappings for the particular VMs. Go ahead and expand this tree to reveal the data stores that are available. I'm going to select the shadow VM data store, which was created specifically for this purpose. Once that's selected, go ahead and click Finish. And if I expand the tasks here, we'll see that it's starting to create some virtual machines. I'm going to switch views here to the recovery site, and you'll see that it's in the process of creating some virtual machines. They're all completed, and yeah, as you can see here, I have critical PC, critical server, test box 1 and 3. These are shadow VMs or placeholder VMs that were created for the purpose of SRM. If I switch back into the protected sites SRM view, we can see that protection for the virtual machines is finished, and I have one protection group that's been created. Up here in the tree on the left-hand side, under protection groups, I can also find the protection group critical servers. If I needed to edit this, I could edit or remove protection. There's the virtual machines. Protection has been configured for all of them. So if I go back to the Site Recovery Manager tree there, we can see that we are pretty much all set with the protection setup. The only thing left to do now is set up a recovery plan, which we'll do in just a second. All right, now for the fun stuff. It's time to create and test a recovery plan. We'll finally be able to see SRM in action at the end of this section. A recovery plan basically controls how virtual machines and a protection group are recovered at the recovery site. Recovery plans for VMs are based on the protection groups to which they belong, which basically comes down to the data store membership, wherever that VM is stored. A basic recovery plan includes a number of prescribed steps that are needed to bring up replicated VMs at the recovery site. These are presenting the latest replicated volumes to the recovery site ESX servers. The recovery plan also tells ESX to scan for these new LUNs and data stores and get them added so that the next step can happen, which is registering these protected VMs with the recovery site ESX servers. Also a good idea, and it's an option with your recovery plan, which is to free up resources. So to do that, we could suspend VMs that are running at the recovery site. These would be VMs like test and dev boxes, maybe for people getting around the policies. Maybe they're running World of Warcraft servers on that excess DR capacity. Whatever it is, it's a good idea to maybe free it up if you want to save money on DR resources. Or get value out of those DR resources by running test and dev, you can use SRM to automatically shut them down when you need that capacity. Also, the recovery plan will boot up virtual machines at the recovery site, which is the sole purpose of SRM. It's to boot up production workloads at a recovery site for the purpose of test or for the purpose of an actual failover, which we hope will never happen. Recovery plans can also be used to create a bubble network on the recovery site ESX servers. This bubble network is just a separate network that's created as needed for testing the recovered virtual machines. And those virtual machines will live within this bubble network, and so that they don't conflict with the other IP addresses on the network, so that production clients aren't accidentally accessing these restored test servers. It's an option for you to do SRM testing anytime you want without affecting production work. So with that little background, let's go ahead and begin the first test recovery of many to come. And I do mean many. One of the greatest reasons for pursuing SRM and setting it up within your environment is that it allows you to test your disaster recovery preparedness anytime you want without affecting production. So test, 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 get those DR plans ironclad without any errors, so that whenever you do need them, you're able to work efficiently and protect your business. With that, let's dive into the demo for creating and testing a recovery plan. Okay, here we are logged in to the recovery site with the vSphere client. You can see local site says recovery site, so we know we are controlling the recovery site's SRM server right now. There's really only one step that happens at the recovery site, and it's right here with the recovery setup. There is a protection setup, but that would be if we wanted to actually use this as the protected site and replicate back to the other site. We're going to keep this very simple, and we're going in one direction only, from protected to recovery. So we're at the recovery site now. You don't have to confuse this with a more complicated setup, although you're free to do that with SRM. So with that, let's set up a recovery plan, which is the only option we have here for recovery setup. Go ahead and click on Create and give it a name. Once you've given it a name, go ahead and click Next. As mentioned earlier, recovery plans are for protection groups. So we only have one here, so we'll select it now. And click Next. I'm going to accept the defaults for VM response time. You could change this if your environment dictates. Safest bet is to stick with the default of 600 seconds. This is where we set up the networks that would be mapped in the event of a test. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at auto, although if you had special virtual networks that you needed mapped to in the event of a test, you would specify them there. Since this is a single server environment, it's not really a problem to do auto and just let the bubble network get created as needed for testing. So go ahead and click Next, basically accepting the defaults for now. As far as suspending local machines, I have two that could be running. They're not running now, but tell you what, I'll start them up to demonstrate how this works. We'll go ahead and select both of them. The rest of these virtual machines are, as you can see, recovery VMs. So these are the placeholder VMs. It's easy to see the difference. But yeah, like I said, I'll check those two so that they can be suspended, demonstrating how we can save resources. When I'm done with that, I clicked Finish, and we're done. That created a recovery plan very quickly. And if I click on that, we can see we have a number of virtual machines. That are going to be recovered in when we test this or actually do a failover. We also have a new screen called Recovery Steps, which if you want to see exactly what is happening throughout the recovery process, we'll be looking in this window. Before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and start up those virtual machines so we have some machines here to play with and to automatically shut down. These are just small virtual appliances you can download from the VMware Virtual Appliance Marketplace. These are basically DOS virtual machines. They're very small, take up very small amounts of memory, and they make a good test case when working in a lab like this. So now that they're running, I'll go to Site Recovery, click on my recovery plan, which I've already done. And up top I have two options, Run and Test. Run is the red button. You will only hit this in the event of a true failover. We're only going to do test right now since that's non-disruptive to production, and we'll bring up our virtual machines in a bubble network. So I'm going to go ahead and click Test. Testing this recovery plan may take several minutes. Do you want to continue? Of course I do. So I'll go ahead and click Yes. And I'll expand this window just a little bit so you can see what's happening down below with the status. Rescanning HBAs, preparing storage for test. As you can also see up here in the recovery steps, it gives you a real-time view as to what is being automated by SRM. At this moment, we're preparing storage and attaching the disks to the recovery site ESX servers. So this is where SRM is talking to this storage replication adapter, which in turn talks to the SAN, and basically gets the latest snapshot of a protected data store and is presenting that to the ESX servers. You might wonder why these first steps under step number 1 were skipped over. It's because we're doing a test. These red steps are really only done if you're doing a true failover, which is actually clicking the red button for run, what was the red button. It's important to do those in a failover situation if you needed to actually shut down the production site so that you don't have conflicts on the network. Because if you're doing a failover, you're not going to be using the bubble network. You're now going to be restoring the actual virtual machines. So here's a key piece to talk about. We can see that storage has been presented. We've attached the disks to the protection group. That's great. We've suspended non-critical virtual machines. So if I switch around to hosts and clusters view, I can see that game server and the Nostalgia VM have both been suspended. Also, if we look into inventory data stores, we can see that there's an additional VMFS data store that's been added. This is a snapped version of the VMFS. It's easy to see that it's not the actual VMFS 1 data store that was in the protected site. So that's good. If I switch then back to site recovery, we'll follow along here as it looks like it's beginning to recover the servers that were replicated. What we're probably waiting for at this moment is for VMware tools within each of the recovered virtual machines to become active and begin to signal back to the recovery site's virtual center that it's awake and ready to go. And SRM will actually be listening for that as well. That's going to be the sign for it to know that, yep, these virtual machines have started. It's time to proceed with the next steps in our list of recovery plan steps. If I expand one of those particular steps for recovering a VM, you can see exactly what was happening the whole time. change network settings, pre-power on steps if needed, power on, wait for OS heartbeat, post power on. Now I'm probably going to have a problem here with test box 1, test box 3. That has to do with the fact that we're waiting for an OS heartbeat. That will probably never happen. It's because it's a DOS machine, so there's no VMware tools inside of that. Okay, now we can see that the timeout has finally happened. The timeout is set to 600 seconds as far as how long SRM will wait for a guest OS heartbeat from the VMware tools to take off. Since test box 1 and test box 3 don't have VMware tools installed, since they're basically DOS virtual appliances, we had to wait 10 minutes. So to the magic of video editing, we were able to get right to this next spot, which is kind of a break. It's just a message that's been inserted into the procedure here to verify that the test recovery had worked. We're going to actually do what it says here, which is verify that the test was successful. Well, to do that, let's take a look at the virtual machines. If I go to hosts and clusters, I will see that I do have 4 virtual machines up and running. This one right here is test box 3. It's a open the console to verify that it's indeed ready to go, and it is. It's ready for us to select an option there. That's not terribly important. For me, what's important is taking a look at the critical PC. Okay, you can see that we've logged into the critical PC here, and I'm going to enter in an account that can test whether recovery was successful or not. So this is an XP computer. This could basically represent your VDI infrastructure possibly, or maybe your virtual desktop infrastructure. That would be a critical asset to protect in a disaster. But basically what I have is start menu, and we'll go to my computer where we can access a critical file share that has been mapped into this virtual desktop. This file share is running off of critical server, which was another VM that was restored with the test plan here. So let's go ahead and open up this Z drive, which is critical file share on critical server. And I have a critical file here, which is the answer to the ultimate question of life, universe, and everything. Let's make sure that this is protected and correct. And yep, it's been protected. The answer is 42. So any fans of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe will get the joke here. So yeah, we've tested recovery. We've tested that our critical PC recovered correctly, and that the file share contained on critical server could also be accessed. So I'm going to say that this recovery was a success. Oh, lost connection. We'll have to go ahead and log back into SRM. That's all right. That happens from time to time. We'll go back to home. Click on Site Recovery. And since we've verified that this is a success, we'll go ahead and click Continue so that the rest of the SRM test can happen, which is basically the cleanup, which is removing the virtual machines that were restored. It will then resume the function of the virtual machines that were suspended during the test. And then the final pieces are actually resetting the storage, which is taking that snapshot that was presented to the recovery site ESX servers. It will, in lack of better words, unpresent it, so remove it from the recovery site. And that's it. That's all there is to setting up a recovery plan and testing it. a quick go back to hosts and clusters so you can see that the protected servers that were tested and restored have now been shut down, and they're back to their normal state, which is that of a placeholder VM. The game server and nostalgia server are back on. Those are the VMs that were running prior to the test. So we'll assume that this all goes to plan and that the site recovery manager finishes the test and puts the storage back in its original state. Well, that about does it for this lesson on configuring SRM. But before you go, I'd like to review some of the key terms that were introduced in this lesson because you'll continue to hear them throughout this video. The first is that of a placeholder VM. Now, this is a virtual machine that's used at the recovery site to store the inventory mappings for individual protected VMs. And this is useful for signifying to SRM admins exactly which virtual machines are protected. This isn't a full copy of the virtual machine. Actually, it's only the configuration, so it's very small and requires only a small data store to live on. The second term is reciprocity. This is another way of saying connecting of SRM sites, or the pairing of a protected site with a recovery site. The third is array managers. The SRM configuration connecting SRM to the storage replication software via the SRA, or storage replication adapter. This is the array manager. Inventory mappings are the relationships of protected site virtual resources, such as folders, networks, and resource pools, with those at the recovery site. We also covered protection groups, which is groups of virtual machines that are stored on replicated data stores and configured for recovery by SRM. And finally, the recovery plan is the steps needed to recover the protected VMs at the recovery site. All right, well, that wraps it up for this lesson on configuring SRM. But before you go, I'd like to review what we learned in this lesson. First off, we learned how to create site pairs, or what's also known as establishing reciprocity between the protected site and the recovery site. We also installed the SRM license at the protected site SRM server after that moment. Then we learned how to configure the array managers, or this is the part that uses the storage replication adapter to allow SRM to communicate to the storage replication software. Then we learned how to configure inventory mappings, mapping virtual machine folders, virtual networks, and resource pools from the protected site to the recovery site. We then learned how to create protection groups to protect virtual machines that are stored on protected data stores. Protected data stores are replicated SAN volumes between the protected site and the recovery site. We then had to find a way to recover those virtual machines, so we created a recovery plan at the recovery site, and this would establish the order and the resources and the priority for restoring virtual machines to that recovery site. And finally, most importantly, we learned how to test a recovery plan. I can't say it enough, but I think that's the most important piece of this SRM software and how to use it, and one of its best capabilities. This is the fact that you can test your disaster recovery plan anytime you want and as often as you need to. Well, that does it for this lesson on configuring SRM. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.